So during the holidays, I got to watch Leave the World Behind, and I was introduced to this card game called Conflicted Survival Scenarios. The question is, what would you do? Now, spoiler alert, if you have not watched Leave the World Behind, you probably should go watch it just so you can come back and be a part of the discussion. For those of you that don't care, Leave the World Behind is basically kind of like a cautionary tale about our dependence on technology, and I think how fragile, not only how fragile our systems are, but how fragile society is as well. The movie's on Netflix, and it's basically predicated on a cyber attack on our country. And I think that right off the bat, that's a very real possibility for us. So the question is this a foreshadowing? It's not like that's ever happened before. What are the odds? Now, I'd like to start off by saying, this is not a new idea, right? The concept of basically a fire sale has been around for a long time. And for those of you that don't know what a fire sale is, number one, the idea is take out comms, you take out the grid, you take out power, utilities, etc. And number two, you inundate them with a bunch of misinformation and introduce chaos. Now, the idea behind this is it's really predicated on how divided a country is, because the idea is that the country will tear itself up from the inside out. So all you have to do is stand back and watch it happen. The real question that I have with this kind of scenario is, number one, what happens when the laws of man disappear, right? In our thin veneer of society, let's say we did have a collapse of some sort. We had a cyber attack on the country. The question is, how fast are the laws of nature gonna take over? And you may be sitting there from the comfort of your couch in Cheetos, and you would say, oh, I would never do some of the things that you see people talk about, if there was a collapse in society. It's real easy for you to say, but I can tell you from real world experience, when I've been to, say, disaster scenes before, it only takes 3 days before people start using their cars as battering rams at the gas pumps. Imagine if it was an attack on the entire country, what's going to happen within, say, a period of 2 weeks. And basically this brings up a bunch of scenarios that people are just really uncomfortable talking about. The will you sacrifice one child to save 100 strangers type stuff. What I can tell you from real life experience is that people handle stress differently. One thing I can tell you for sure is that people are always in some kind of stage of grief. They may be lashing out at people, they may be bargaining. A lot of people are in denial. Just people handle stress differently, and they soothe themselves differently. Now, in the movie itself, I think they do a pretty good job of portraying that in the movie. And there were several scenes that really stood out to me, while I was watching it. One of the biggest ones was a scene with Ethan Hawke where he's trying to plead to get medicine from a guy, trying to barter with a guy who's a prepper, and he makes a statement. He says, without a cell phone, I am a useless man. And I think that statement rings true for a lot of people. There's another scene with Julia Roberts where she is, just thinking out loud, and she starts talking about, the stuff that you do in a disaster scene, like filling up the bathtubs with water, and where's the hand crank radio, and where are those little straws that we drink through so we can make, dirty water safe to drink. I think the movie actually presents, pretty good scenarios that would be good exercises for you and your family should something like this happen. I mean, what if you were on a vacation, for example, and you had rented, somebody's house out, and then they just show up in the middle of the night, and number one, they're not asking the family to leave. They're just saying, hey, we want to stay here because we want a place where we feel safe away from the city. You really have to look at both sides, both of their perspectives, right? You've got people that own a house, right? They've got their bug out location, if you will, already, but they've rented it out to somebody. Like, do you tell that family, well, you just got to go? I mean, in the movie, they actually offer to refund the money for it. But, you know, how would you handle that with strangers? You know, if you were the owner of the house, would you tell the family that had, you know, given you money and was staying there on vacation, would you tell them to leave? Or would you do what they did in the movie, like offer for them to stay there and try to figure out a solution together? On the other side of the coin, let's say you were the family that was staying in somebody else's house and you don't feel comfortable in the middle of the night. Do you stay there, potentially having to deal with whatever threat that could potentially be? Do you go ahead and leave? Do you try to get back home to where all of your, say, resources are? Now in the movie, I don't really think that they were preppers, right? Because they didn't have any of their preps. They didn't talk about a bug out location. I think that they just really wanted to get home, but they weren't sure if they could do that. And when they did try, they found that the roads were closed and they started to see the breakdown of society. Like when Ethan left the house and when GH, I can't remember his name right off the top of my head, when he left, you know, he saw planes coming down. And then I can't remember, towards the end of the movie, like the last 20 minutes of the movie, they actually see explosions off in the distance as well in the city. Now, one common theme that a lot of people would say, you know, I guess it really just depends on your perspective, but I have been to disaster scenes, and sure, there is a lot of chaos that occurs at the onset of something like this, but my hope, based on what I've seen in the past, is that people would eventually come together and they would eventually try to find a way to make things better. The movie itself is kind of open-ended, and there's a lot of questions that are left unanswered throughout that movie. One of those questions that was offered was, you know, is there a threat of some kind of radiological event? The black helicopters are coming. They know what I'm talking about. Darn! Can't even have a good discussion. One theme that resonates through the whole entire movie is, you know, these open-ended questions that are occurring throughout it. Number one, they kind of offered that there could be some kind of radiological event, like the son, he starts to lose his teeth and he's coughing up blood. And, you know, they're going out trying to find this prepper guy who's Kevin Bacon, and they're trying to barter, you know, for medicine for the kid, even though they have no idea what's actually wrong with him, but they're suggesting that it was some kind of radiological event. Now, obviously, from watching the movie, if it was a radiological event, more than just the son would have been affected. It would have been all of them. A lot of people would say, well, you know, if that were the case, then it's game over. They're probably right. In that kind of scenario, yeah, it is probably game over. But in the movie, they don't really present it that way. Now, understand, this is a movie, right? We're not talking real life. But what I do like about it is the fact that it brings up these questions. Like, what would you do in the event that these symptoms or signs presented themselves? What are you going to do as a family? And a lot of people are really uncomfortable when we start talking about these gray areas, and that's why I want to bring up this card game. If you go to conflictedthegame.com, they have all of these like card decks that are available. They also have board games, but the thing that really interests me the most about this particular one that I'm holding, which this is the Survival Scenarios edition. This is something that Chris introduced to Jason and I on a Zoom meeting, and he just started reading what was the information that was on the cards, and I was like, wow, this is an awesome tool that I could use for teaching. So I'm going to go ahead and give y'all an example. We're going to talk about these survival scenarios. I don't have anything planned. I'm just going to take whatever off of the deck. But here, the first card is the Joker card, and it has the rules for the game. Basically, the way it works is you go around in a circle and you start reading off these survival scenarios. And what they're telling you to do is, okay, whoever has the best answer gets to keep that card, and then eventually whoever has the most cards will win. But what I'm going to say is that I don't know how you can say this person had the best answer. Like, they would have to be a professional in their field. They would have to have experience with these various scenarios. And how do people that are not experienced or not experts in these fields, how do you determine what is the best answer? I guess you would have to come to a consensus as a group in order to play the game. But besides that, I just think it's a really good idea. So let's just start, and I'm gonna go ahead and make myself vulnerable. I'm gonna tell y'all what my gut reaction is to these questions. And besides, the best stuff happens in the comment section, and this is the kind of stuff that we can learn from each other. So let's just give it a go. Your home is attacked and marauders are dragging a loved one towards their vehicle. Both perpetrators are armed with pistols, and you are armed with a semi-automatic rifle. Based on your training and experience, you have a 50% chance of neutralizing the attackers or hitting your loved one. Would you take a shot or not? You know, this is actually a really good one. And I would have to say that this is definitely based on your level of training. And now a lot of people out there are going to say right off the cuff, they're going to say, oh yeah, I'm taking that shot. But you have to consider all of the variables in this equation. Number one, someone's going to say, yeah, I've taken a lot of static shots at hostage style targets, right? Like they have the swing plate with steel, or maybe they're shooting paper targets, etc. And they're probably shooting from a known distance. In this scenario, number one, I want to know, is this a static exercise that we're talking about here? Are we moving? How large is that window for me to shoot at? What is the gun sighted at range-wise? Did you sight in at 25 yards? Did you sight in at 100 yards, 200 yards? What rifle is it that we're talking about here? And number three, I think there's something that people don't really think about. If you don't introduce stress inoculation into your training, well, you just don't understand how your body reacts with that much adrenaline pumping through it. Number one, you are going to have a loss of fine motor control, especially if we're talking about your spouse or your child. You're not going to have the control that you normally have in that scenario. So that is definitely something that you need to think about. And number two, if you fail at this, if you accidentally shoot your loved one, is that something that you can live with for the rest of your life? Odds are high. In the card, they actually say 50-50. Like you have a 50% chance. Now that's a pretty good chance, but I'm gonna tell you, for me personally, I've been on the other side of that, where now I have to go looking for somebody who has been taken in a scenario like this. And I can tell you, after 24 hours, their chances of survival plummet. My first gut reaction is yes, I train like this. I do encourage stress inoculation, and I am constantly moving. It's very rare for me to actually shoot from a static position. I typically, the only time I really shoot from static position is when I'm dry firing. The rest of the time, I'm actually moving, through my courses, doing active shooter, the collateral drill. Like there's lots of drills that you can practice on the run. So that's something that I do a lot of. And so for me, understanding what happens post the scenario itself, I can tell you 100%, I'm gonna take that shot. Now y'all can massacre me in the comments section. Let's go to the next one and see what it has to say. How do you tell others about the need to prepare without making yourself a target for unwanted visitors in the future? This is great because that's what we're doing right here. I can tell you from my time in the field in technical rescue and in search and rescue that I developed a passion to try to help as many people as I possibly could, just because I've seen people at the bottom. They've lost everything. And I just really became passionate about helping people as a result of that, because of the empathy factor, right? Like you spend enough time with people that have lost everything, and it really takes a toll on you emotionally. And I think the way that you handle teaching people or trying to help as many as you possibly can is by giving as much information out as you possibly can. I try to introduce scenario-based training into my videos. I try to produce videos that have helpful content of things, ideas that you can do, that you can practice, how to plan as a family, how to make your bug in or bug out bags, what to do in the event of, you know, national disaster, acts of God, etc. I mean, these are things that I'm pretty passionate about, and so the best way I know of to try to help people without putting myself in danger is I try not to specifically tell you exactly where I live. I will tell you, you know, I live in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains, but I don't want, you know, 200 people showing up at my house either that I don't know. So I try to put the information out there, and I try to reserve certain things. I don't show the audience everything by any means, but that's how I try to handle it. All right, and let's just do one more. I'll just pick one out of the deck here. Your family has been without food for quite some time now, and things are beginning to look bleak. You stumble upon a group of people who are friendly enough to barter goods with you. They have a small supply of food that they are willing to trade, but will only accept your only firearm as payment. Since this is all you have of value, how would you react in this situation, and what would you do? It's a tough one, right? What I will say for me, I immediately go back to my training. Defense is always number one, because if you can't defend and hold your resources, they're worthless. Right now, the card does suggest that you've been without food for a while, and you are not going to be thinking at the top of your game. You're not going to be firing on all 8. I think what they're trying to present to you, the scenario is, you know, do you take it by force? I can tell you immediately my gut reaction is no, I would not do that. I would, you know, seek another means of trying to procure that. And I think one way that you could do that is by offering your services to that particular group. For example, bartering. You could barter services for goods. Now, they obviously are looking for a weapon. It's probably highly likely that they need someone who is qualified to run that weapon. At that point, I think that I would try to bargain with them. Like, do you have, for example, someone who's head of your security? Or do you have someone who is a scout who goes out and looks for things that would help the group? Do you have somebody who could potentially put a strike team together to make these things happen? And I think that's where I would take that conversation of trying to reason with them or trying to bargain with them to see if there's some kind of avenue where I could offer my services in exchange for some food. I mean, with my background, that would be pretty easy for me to reason with them about that. You know, having survival, escape, resistance, evasion experience, that's something that I could bring to the table. Now, I would tell you that in that particular case, I would not offer up everything to them as far as full disclosure of what my talents are and or what my resources are. That would be the kind of thing that you would have to feel out from that group. But I think you could definitely open up negotiations for something like that in that way. A question that comes up a good bit is, what do you think the skill sets are that would be most valuable, like post-apocalyptic? Would it be, you know, having a background in medicine, like if you were a doctor, an ER nurse, a combat medic, a paramedic? You know, do you have some kind of pre-hospital, first aid experience, etc.? What about, say, mechanics? People that are mechanically inclined, that would be able to fix things or to be able to MacGyver stuff out in the field. Like, what are y'all's thoughts on, you know, what are the best skill sets to have in an emergency like we're describing right now? Something I'm considering, I'm not going to read any more, you know, situations to y'all out of this card deck, but I think you see how this could be just something really cool for your family to sit down, and a good way to open up discussions about maybe topics that are difficult to discuss. Now, the way that I want to leave this video is I do want to kind of leave it open-ended, right? Just like how Leave the World, how they left it open-ended as well. What I want to say is that I really don't feel like there are any 100% that is the correct answer, right? I think a lot of it is based on environment and scenario, and there's just all these variables that go into the equation, and I think that a lot of that makes it difficult to say yes 100% that is the correct answer. And I know that there are going to be a lot of people that disagree with me. This was kind of an impromptu video during the holidays. I just thought, you know, I have all of this stuff going on in my life. I got to watch this movie, I got to play this card game, and that just brought up all this stuff that we do, survival scenarios. That's the kind of training that I love doing the most. I like, you know, doing adventure videos where we're playing out a scenario, and I just thought this would be something cool to bring to the table. So what I want to know is what your thoughts are on the scenarios from Leave the World Behind, and then, you know, go ahead, challenge my answers from, you know, the Conflicted game. I'd like to see what your answers are. Like, how would you answer those questions? So go back, think about them, you know, get in the comment section. I think that's where the best stuff happens anyway. So until next time, like, share, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and keep fueling those fires. Do you want premium ad-free content? Duh. Content that's not censored by big tech, of course. Well, with SD Insider, you can get behind the scenes and a whole lot more. Link in the description.